So people, Libertarian Oxymoron Rants has decided to make a video on why Libertarian Socialism isn't an oxymoron. However, that just isn't the case. Maybe in a theoretical fairy tale world that he lives in, and this is the problem, and I addressed it before, and I shall address it again.
I'm no communist, I'll tell you that right now. I believe a man should own his own house and car and cow. I like this private ownership, I want to be left alone. Let the government run its business and let me run my own.
Hi there, you've been linked to this video because you've claimed that Libertarian Socialism is an oxymoron.
People such as himself do not understand the difference between theory and practice. And he lives outside the boundary of that. He doesn't understand that what you have on paper is not the same thing as what you put into practice. He hasn't got the intelligence to understand that.
Because environmentalism challenges the notion of constantly using the Earth's resources to create wealth, you just have to shut it off completely and disregard all the evidence. And anything that conflicts with this ideological made-up fantasy that you have nailed into your thick skull of a totally free market, which would be morally reprehensible if it were real anyway, just has to go, regardless of the evidence supporting it. You're a fucking lost cause. I am done wasting my time with you, you twisted, moronic, ultra-conservative, flag-waving, knuckle-dragging, patronising, anti-scientific, right-wing troglodyte. Now fuck off.
Didn't I say that when you put something into practice, it doesn't necessarily mean to say it's going to turn out that way of what they had in theory? You see, it's just like the theory of how pigs can fly. I could write a book called, oh, the theory of how pigs can fly. Yeah, that's all fantastic. It's fantastic until you go to put it into practice. It's just a fact of life. If you cannot argue with things such as, the laws of gravity, what makes you believe that you can argue with economics, such as the law of supply and demand? You can't argue with that. Nor can you argue with the importance of prices. You can see that people such as himself do not understand economics. And the reason why he does not understand economics is because prices is the number one most important thing to the entire economy. Without the information of prices, you cannot allocate scarce resources to the market efficiently. You wouldn't hold the information of what to produce more of, how much to produce, where to allocate the scarce resources into commodities to, provide for the market. And you wouldn't know the information of what to invest more in. You wouldn't understand the needs and wants of the people. So to think you can run an economy that's moneyless and somehow achieve this rationally is ignorant. It's called not understanding economics.
Scotty M is an extremely vulgar right-wing libertarian on YouTube. Those of you who remember my exchange with him back when I was a liberal will understand that this person is so immune and impervious to facts, reason and thinking that no amount of argumentation will ever convince him to stop being a racist, homophobic, UKIP supporting, Rangers supporting, babbling free market enthusiast. That is how he is, and that is how he will remain until he dies.
I've said before, the whole purpose of the study of economics is basically our place on this earth. How do we, better improve the living standards of the masses whilst using the fewest resources as possible? Now, we all know that resources are not infinite. They're finite, just like wood. Wood is a finite resource. It doesn't last forever. And the fact of the matter is, and this is a fact, the fact is, there isn't enough resources to go around everyone. So therefore, how do you better improve the living standards of the masses with the fewest resources being used? How do you achieve that efficiently? If you understand the definition of the word efficient, you will understand it's all about achieving something in a minimalist way. Achieving it whilst using the fewest possible. A prime example of a very successful businessman was, of course, John Davison Rockefeller, who, of course, ran Standard Oil. Standard Oil never held a monopoly. In the 1870s, Standard Oil was faced with one of their main competitors, and that of course was the producer of the electric light bulb. Look around you in every room that you are in. Look around you everywhere you look. You will see the electric light bulb. You do not see kerosene. That was Standard Oil, basically their main product. That's what they sold. He knew that, of course, he could not continue to keep his costs up. He couldn't anyway because of the fact his main competitor would have wiped the floor with him. But that's besides the point. The most important point of the matter is, John Davison Rockefeller did not become successful because of some predatory pricing and all the rest of it. He done so because he was more efficient than the rest of his competitors. I mentioned in a video previously that in order to maximise your profits, you minimise your costs. That means using fewer resources, and that's what they will do to benefit themselves and to benefit others. Now, this is a thing that Libertarian Oxymoron Rants doesn't understand. He doesn't understand the purpose of why the study of economics exists. He doesn't understand the information of prices. He doesn't understand how important that is. It's all well, talking about how you're going to provide for this, that, and the next thing and produce all these wonderful little things and how the workers will own the means of production and all this theoretical fairy tale nonsense. And how in this world we'll prevent private ownership of property and all the rest of this, and somehow it'll all work out. Now, the problem with that argument, and I even pointed out again in a previous video, was the problem with the communal ownership of land. It was a problem that before the Industrial Revolution, the masses were dying of starvation. In fact, the population would have been nothing because you compare Britain before the 1760s and you compare it to what Britain would become by 1919, the population had more than tripled. And it more than tripled because of the fact that the enclosure movement had occurred. It's the number one reason why socialism doesn't work. Because it lacks the information of prices. That's why Marxism failed. It's not as simple as saying, well, it failed just because it was the government. Okay? That's not the reason why it failed. It failed because it could not hold the information of prices. You see, when you distort the information of profits and losses, you distort the very information that enables you to provide for the consumers, to provide for the people. Now, what he's arguing basically for is to subordinate the individual's rights, to take away all individual rights and take away the individual's, liberty to owning their own private property, their own private business. Now let's just imagine for a second that, of course, you did have this way and you got rid of private ownership of property. You're going to need an entity there in order to keep it out of sight so that private ownership doesn't return. You're going to need to govern over individuals because that's what makes up society. You're going to have to govern individuals' self-interest and keep that self-interest in guard to prevent individuals going and doing their own thing. And if you seek to punish individuals from going and doing their own things, such as starting up their own private business, then that is not libertarian. However, here's the point. You're going to need that entity there to govern that. That, by definition, is governance. You see, it's authoritarian. You're going to need the entity there to guard it, the entity there to prevent it. The main reason of why socialism had failed was purely because of, not because of, oh well, it's the government and therefore we can have our socialism without the government. And that wasn't the reason why. The reason why is because socialism that involves and is defined by central planning. Anyone who tries to redefine socialism to suit themselves such as what Libertarian Oxymoron Rants is basically trying to do. If you try to redefine socialism to suit your own agenda, you're not going to get anywhere. You see, the whole definition of socialism, socialism, is basically centralising. That's what defines socialism. Central planning. You're centralising it. Okay? Now, socialism's all about the plan. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you talk about socialism being, workers' control over the means of production or state ownership of the means of production. That's not going to matter in the slightest. The very reason why that the Soviet Union was faced with the problems that it had, that it basically had, was simply because it never held the information of prices. This is the reason why things under nationalisation don't work. It doesn't work because the government doesn't hold the information of prices. It distorts it. It doesn't matter whether you talk about a mixed economy or whether you talk about just socialism in general. It doesn't work. And the reason why it ends up inefficient, such as British Rail, for example, before Margaret Thatcher's time, British Rail was, of course, a disaster. And the reason why British Rail was a disaster is simply because the fact that you don't hold the information of prices, as I say. How can you rationally, run something? How can you do it efficiently if you don't hold the information of profits and losses? Government's price controls distort that information. And the reason why I mention this is because your ideology, this libertarian oxymoron, or let's just say libertarian socialism, your oxymoron ideology basically is predicated on the idea of having a moneyless based economy. How on earth can you have a moneyless based economy that has no information of prices whatsoever and then run an economy efficiently? Do you not understand how idiotic and ignorant that really is? The reason why it is so ignorant is simple. It's like I said, there's nothing more important than the information of prices. You see, the reason why the free market works is because it's not pro-business. It's pro-consumer. And it's driven by consumers' demand. And when consumers do not get what they want, they'll go elsewhere and get it. Now, we all know about all these myths of all the monopolies and all the rest of it. We've heard all that nonsense before. Let's just get to the point here. When consumers go into shops, and over the course of a period of time, maybe they go into shops and they buy the products, and over the course of a month, or maybe even 2 months, or maybe even a year, over the course of a month, a business can look at what their most bought products are and what their least bought products are. What do you think that's telling the business? The information that is telling the business is, this is what consumers want more of, and this is what consumers don't want more of. It's telling them their profits and losses. It also tells them, since these are the products that people are buying most of, these are the ones we're going to produce more of, therefore we know what scarce resources to take from in order to turn into commodities to provide for the market. They know that information. They also know how much to produce. They're told that information from the profits that they gain. Now, it's the same thing with losses. They're not going to produce more of what is not being sold. Okay, so they're going to try and lower the cost of them, make probably a loss on it, but try and get rid of as much of it as they can, and they're not going to waste scarce resources in producing what is not being sold. Now that was all given, that information was given to businesses through consumers' free choice, through the consumer telling the market what they want. Now, it's irrational to think that businesses produce and set prices themselves, because it's all well producing products and setting your own price, but the underlying reality is it's what the consumer is willing to pay for it. You see, I actually have a logical argument for my case, and that logical argument is based on the information of prices that I've put out there so often. To believe that you can run in any sort of economy without the information of prices is a massive mistake. Prices are not obstacles to getting the things that you want. Prices are basically important pieces of information to the market. They're signals. They tell the market what to produce more of, how much to produce, where to allocate the scarce resources, how much to invest, what to invest more in, and all the rest of it. It tells the market what's scarce and what's not. And well, we tend to mean, when we talk about scarce resources, we're talking about resources that are not infinite, but they're finite. But when we talk about, in this context, the scarce resources, resources that are so little. Maybe you produce a certain product and there's not enough of it to go around, and therefore the price is higher. Now, this is something he doesn't get. When you see high prices in the market, it signifies that there's a lack of, there's a scarcity. When you see low prices in the market, it means there's more of it. So, that's all in relation to supply and demand. Now, this is why I said that for some odd reason, people such as himself wouldn't argue with the laws of gravity, but they somehow seem to believe that they can argue with the laws of supply and demand. If you jump off a cliff, you aren't going up the way, you're going down the way. That's just the reality. You can't argue with that. It's not something that you can argue with. You see, the number one reason, it's got nothing at all to do with immigration. Sure, the immigration problem is in itself a big problem, and it puts strain on things such as the NHS, because the more people flooding into the country demanding treatment, then of course there's going to be a bigger problem. However, the NHS, for example, was a failure long before. And that is because of the lack of information of prices. The government can't know that information. It doesn't. Therefore, because it doesn't hold the information of profits and losses, what the government ends up doing is mass producing, overproducing, allocating it into the wrong parts of the market. And what does that cause? Massive, big, long waiting lines. And unfortunately, as a result of the massive, big, long waiting lines, you end up with thousands of people neglected every single year. And of course, unfortunately, many of those people lose their life. Now, it's so sad to say that people just don't listen. And it's like they're not interested. They're not interested in any sort of alternative. And yet you try to tell them that, the problem, and it just goes over their head. And that's the problem with someone such as himself. Because he seems to believe that he can redefine socialism to suit his own agenda. And that, the failure of state socialism, he says. State socialism. That basically just is socialism. But besides the point, he seems to believe that he can redefine socialism to suit his own agenda. And basically, he thinks that the failure of socialism was because of government. Well, in terms of price controls, sure. But thinking that you can have an economy without the information of prices is an even bigger problem. That's an even bigger problem than Marxism. In fact, it's more, Marxism's probably more rational than this idea of libertarian socialism. And I pointed out before, it's just so ignorant to believe that you can have this utopia, but you want to prevent people like me. People like me. That's right, son. You want to prevent people like me from owning my own private business. It's just so sad. You see, I want to become a professional photographer. And it'd be so nice because there are private businesses out there and you want to prevent private businesses. And you want to prevent me from basically becoming a photographer. You want to force me into your little collective group. And I do not take kindly to that. You're a laughing stock. You don't even understand the very fundamental basics of economics. And that's just what it all comes down to. You see, it's all well banging off about your ideology, but how's that going to turn out in practice? Let's face it, people want wages. They want to work for money. People want to work for money. That's their incentive. It's called the profit motive. Now, the fact that you think you could ignore the profit motive and somehow have all your utopian nonsense and everything will be all fine. Yeah, this is fantastic. Everything will all be fine in this fantastic fairy tale world. And that is, of course, until the people begin to seek their own self-interest from your wonderful libertarian socialism. And when the people seek their own self-interest and they try to escape, we all know exactly where it leads to. It leads to a group of authoritarian lunatics who don't like the idea that people don't like their socialism, therefore attack them. It always happens. Always. And that is just exactly what happens throughout recorded history. What happened to the very people, and it wasn't because of government. Okay? It wasn't because of government. It's because your socialism requires force. It does. When the people seek their own self-interest and seek to leave, that is when you begin to see the true colours of leftism. And it is a mental health disorder. I have great admiration for anyone who can see through the bull of socialism. Unfortunately, people of my generation, well, I was born in 1984, people maybe younger than myself, who are the millennial generation, unfortunately, have been brainwashed with all of the socialist nonsense. Thinking that you can have all this wonderful utopian nonsense of libertarian socialism is just incredibly ignorant. We are not a group. We are individuals. This is just one of the facts that socialists don't like. And of course, Libertarian Oxymoron Rants has certainly made that very clear. Thinking that you can take away my individual rights and my individual liberty, thinking that you can prevent that and then call that libertarian is just idiotic. It's lunacy. It's beyond belief. Where did you get your brains from? It's unbelievable. Anyway, thank you for watching my video, and I shall talk to you later. Cheers.